Is anybody else here beside Kristen? No?
Just me.
Okay.
It's me.
Ella?
It will be Athena and Jamie, but they're calling in after Otis Library goes.
Okay, that's fine. Ella, are you there yet? Okay. No, just Kristen. Okay.
All right, I didn't get my 2,400 yet.
Ella?
Hi, it's Ella.
Okay, thanks.
You hear from him? No?
Make sure you mute your TV.
Right. Are you calling in or are you coming in? Thank you. He's here. Okay.
Wait.
He's in the building.
Yes. It's on the elevator.
Careful, I was ready to take over. I know, that's all right, I didn't want, wanted to make sure we knew what was going on. If you're only going to be a few minutes, we'll wait. Stage a coup, though, if you'll be careful. All right, let's rock. You on, Mike? All right.
Good evening, all. My apologies. Sorry, a few minutes off. Let's begin. John?
Okay, thank you. Tonight, we have two budgets. First, we have the Otis Library, which contains one line item, and what page is that on?
115.
Page 115. And I will defer to the library director for any comments, and then we can take questions.
All right, thank you. Also with me tonight is our board president, Nick Fortson. Thank you all for inviting us. I'll just make a few opening comments, and then if you have questions. I hope that you found our budget document and the ancillary materials persuasive. I think it gives a pretty good overview of the undulations in our funding over the period beginning with the library's occupancy of the new building. Do I need to stop for a moment?
No, that's
No.
just people joining the conference call.
Oh, okay, very good. I think the other thing that needs to be kept in mind as you review these documents is, as happened during the recession, when we reopen, I think we can forecast that the library is going to be even busier than our normal operations. Currently, we're circulating about 90,000 items a year. I expect to see probably a 20% increase in usage as a result of people needing those resources. This follows the trend from 2006 through 2008. Similarly, I think we would be forecasting about a 20% increase in our on-site occupancy. That is running about 100,000 people a year now. I would expect that there'd be, if the past is precedent, we'd see another 20% increase. Again, these aren't speculative. These are based on what happened after the last major economic downturn that we suffered through. I also, would ask you to keep in mind as you're considering the request, which I was, I believe, $1,050,000 is what we were tentatively slated for. Please keep in mind some of the documents showing the ups and downs of our allocations over the years. And I would be especially mindful of one of the documents that summarizes the distressed municipalities list and does give you a sense of where we currently stand in relationship to some of our peers. Norwich, as of 2019, was 12th on the list of distressed municipalities with per capita support of approximately 79 cents. That can be compared, I think, quite adequately with some of the communities that are considered more distressed. I hope you would keep that in mind as well. And I don't know, with those generalities, I'd ask you what specific things you would like me to further comment on or contribute.
Does Nick want to say anything? First,
Where are these documents?
I'm checking, I don't know.
You want to ask?
Okay,
Yeah.
go ahead,
Well, I was
Alderman
gonna say,
DeLucia.
I don't know that we have ever gotten that packet that Bob's referring to.
I have not seen it.
Right.
Which packet are we discussing?
The one that you're referring to, you're pointing to some data, and I don't know if that was ever given to us.
This was circulated I sent this to the members of the council.
I didn't get,
Yeah.
I think that was,
Do you remember when
is that email?
about when that was?
Did you email that?
Would have been around the time of the original request,
So it's
October.
February.
or November, whatever it was.
So, I mean, I probably wouldn't have it then.
You didn't receive the budget request for fiscal year 2020, 2021?
Generally, we don't get those generally? They go
Well,
through
no,
the city
generally you
manager?
don't, and that's why I did want to circulate it to each individual council member, and I had spoken, I think, both to John and Josh
Yep,
prior to
he's-
doing that.
He sent it back on December 16th.
Yeah.
Did we get it?
I don't know if everyone got it, but
I sent it to
Probably did.
all of the
Individually.
council members,
it's right here.
but
think we-
I'm also more than happy to go back and send it again.
No. I don't think
No. My apologies to you, Bob. I do have the email with the PDF attached. I
Okay.
just never moved it into a file folder, and that's where I was looking for it.
Well, under the circumstances, what's the phrase? No blood, no foul? Something like that?
I think, some of us have met with you, I know, so you discussed that material, with us. I think you presented it then.
With I did, and I think as Joe has confirmed by looking through it, I did send the document out. It is, fairly lengthy, but I think it summarizes in some detail the kinds of things that we think illustrate the library's value to the community and also the things that we have accomplished. And if I could add an addendum to that, I'm sure, as you all know, we're now closed. We really didn't have a choice in the matter, and it was done with, considerable reluctance on my part, because we are a focal point for activity in the community, and especially in the downtown area. But I also wanted to emphasize that in addition to everything that's covered in this document, we've continued to emphasize service to the community, even as we've been closed. We've established a number of online presences. That includes all of our children's story times, our book clubs. I don't know whether this is a benefit to our budget situation or not, but if you're inclined to like online poetry readings, you can listen to me reciting Robert Frost's Mowing. I'm not saying you have to, I'm just offering it as a suggestion. It's actually pretty good. It was done in one take. I was surprised at the quality myself. We did it on Zoom. We're still doing, so each week we're adding something new. We've been able to take a number of programs that under normal circumstances would not be available off-site. I'm thinking one in particular that is very popular called Ancestry.com, and we've gotten permission to share that with the public over the internet, so they now have home access to that, along with things like Pronunciator, which is a language learning tool. So anywhere we can find a niche to meet a need that may exist in the community and isn't covered and has to be supplemented by an online service, we've done our best to either provide them directly or to provide the links to the resources that will allow access to the public. I think I'd also say that one of the benefits, if there are any benefits to not having as much of an on-site presence, is that we're also learning a lot more about what the public is going to need in the future if there are going to be changes in the way that we access information. So I'm sure there's going to be a bigger investment made in making virtual resources more available. And that's going to come with a price tag. Currently, to provide what we have, it costs us almost $7,000 a year just for that particular. That's still less than we have to pay for our parking, which is more like $10,000, but it's still a sizable chunk of change. Ask a question, because you know I'm just going to keep talking.
Yeah. Go ahead, Joe.
Thank you. So just for clarification, there were two emails. One had the document attached and one didn't, and that was, I guess, where the shuffle happened. But I do, now that I see this, I do remember reading through this, and that leads me to my first question. Last year, we talked about investigating the idea that programs only happen if you have the staff to be able to implement them, right? And that there were two concerns about the staff, is retaining the quality staff that you have, and then also the way in which they are remunerated and what kind of benefits that they have. And I expressed to you at that point that it was my ultimate hope that somehow the staff could be brought on par with the benefits that are afforded our educational staff and teachers and so on. Has there been any investigation of trying to find a way to get your staff on par or get them under the umbrella of the educational system?
I would say that we've actively pursued the former, but not vis-a-vis the school system, no. But we have looked at ways of improving remuneration, and we certainly would try to do that if we have the resources adequate to do it. At the moment, we're pretty much on a flat line and have been for several years. And we have lost staff. We lost two people. Neither of them for reasons other than the fact that they they were able to find a different kind of employment. One of them is now actually the director at the Preston Public Library. The other is the city clerk for the town of Plainfield. So both of them were leaving for reasons, but they both professed, and this is, I admit it's anecdotal, I don't have it in writing, that if circumstances allowed, they would love to come back and work at Otis.
Yeah, I just want to make this comment. Bob mentioned that, right now we're going through a tough time. A lot of people are unemployed. And what he said is that based on the recession that we had in 2008, the attendance at the library increased 20%. And so he's saying that that could happen again, and I think it's very likely that it will, because the library is a place for people to go, it's to be entertained, it's to do a lot of things. And in this community, specifically in the New London community, this whole county here, when you look at the different counties where there's going to be a lot more vulnerable people, this county is much higher than some of our other counties. And so our city is very much part of that. So I think we're going to see a major increase in the number of people that come to the library. So it's real important that we have activities for them so that they can come and do the things that they enjoy doing and in a safe environment. Right now, if you go to the library during the day, it's closed, okay? However, you'll probably see some cars out there in front of the library or people standing out in front of the library with their phones. And they use the phones because we have public Wi-Fi. So the library, no question, is a very important part of downtown. Again, we bring in over 100,000 people into the library every year. Depending on the programming that we have, we can bring in a whole lot more people. And when we bring in people, we just don't bring them in from just the town. People actually come from outside of the area. And I know there's been a couple of events where people have come from, where I've been there, where people have come from Massachusetts and Rhode Island because of the programming that we have there. Now, that's very important. It sort of ties in with everything that you want to do with downtown. We're a major driver of people downtown. So if we cut back on the program, if we cut back on the amount of funds, that means we cut back on the amount of programs that we have. If we cut down on the amount of programs we have, we don't have the number of people coming to the library. And when they leave the library, a lot of people go and they stop at the local restaurants. They do whatever you would do in any downtown. So my whole point here is that we're going to see an increase in the number of people after this whole social distancing and stay-at-home thing is over with. And then those people, when they do come downtown, they do spend money. And so from an economic standpoint, the library is a major driver of activity in the downtown region, and I don't think we should forget that.
Thank you. Just one more.
Go ahead.
So your ask, I should say the proposal is $100,000 less than your ask.
Yes, that's correct.
In what ways will that impact what you do for the year in the library if that were to stand?
It's in the budget.
Oh, no, yeah.
Well, it's going to mean we're going to have to make some difficult
It was
decisions
1.15.
about materials, about what we are able to
Yeah, there's two, I got.
do in terms of staffing and also any hiring that we're going to do to replace people who've already left. The jobs that, the people who left, their positions have not been filled. They're still vacant. There's going to be an impact on some of our physical plant needs. The building is, dates from 2007. We're going to have to start looking at those things. Already have. I also, at this point, don't know quite what it's going to mean to be reopening to the public. There are going to be added costs there, too. We've already started planning for reopening because the ultimate goal is to get the library back into public service, both online but also physically, allow it to be accessible to the public. I don't know all of the costs that might be involved there. You've got different age groups that you're going to be dealing with. I mean, I don't want to go on a monologue about that, but there are going to be unknown costs, you know, black swans, if you will, because we don't know what kind of physical separation we're going to have to implement. For example, we have a large senior population that comes to the library. They may need special consideration, as do the children. You know, are we going to have to use plexiglass barriers to ensure that the public and the staff are kept safe? Those are unknowns at the moment. They're only things we're beginning to look at and to plan for. But they are incremental expenses that we're going to have to add to our operating budget that, you know, if you were asking me about these sorts of things at our last meeting last year, I wouldn't even have had to consider. And it's also a matter of looking at, we do really have to look at the staff and look at their physical constitution.
Glass barriers to ensure that the public and the staff are kept safe. Those are unknowns at the moment. They're only things that we're beginning to look at and plan for. But they are.
Whoever just called in, you gotta mute your TV. Thank you.
Yeah, Bob did mention physical plan. And when I took over as the board chairperson, I went to the library to meet everybody at the library, all the staff people. And so I was taken down in the basement, and you know, they had a big book sale down in the basement with the Friends of Library. And I was shocked because there is a lot of historical information about the city of Norwich. I believe the newspapers go back to the 1800s, if I'm not mistaken. And these are all sitting on a pallet. And unfortunately, the time that I went down there, the basement had flooded a little bit. And they're all on a pallet, and this wonderful historic information is not being adequately protected because the library just doesn't have the funds to really work on its physical plan. And it does flood there every so often. And it's sort of sad to see that because it was just amazing to see these newspapers back from the 1800s.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
It does bring me to a question. I know we've talked before about this, but the transferring those documents to electronic versions.
We're working on that.
Yeah, that's what. Yeah, I know we talked about that years ago. It's been a while since I've been
We
here,
have one person whose principal responsibility, aside from their general responsibilities to the public, that person is actively digitizing things. So that's a daily thing. In fact, he does some of that voluntarily outside of his normal working hours. And you'll see some of the results in Norwich Magazine. There'll be a regular feature there with that information being reproduced for the public.
Is there access to that information as it's digitized, or?
Not yet, but you know, one step at a time, incremental change, Mark. We're working on it.
Okay.
Alderman Wilson?
So one of the questions that I have is, I know it's been one of those things that's going back and forth is, in previous years about the endowment. Well, you know, the amount that you aren't allocated, you have an endowment and you can do X, Y, and Z. Could you elaborate on the purpose of the endowment and kind of...
The purpose of the endowment is to assist with and to supplement our operating income. This year, we will be taking approximately $130,000. That's what we've currently estimated. We'll be taking from the endowment to cover the gap between operating revenues, the allocation from the city. Parenthetically, although this probably isn't a direct answer to your question, I have to point out that as a result of having to engage in social distancing, we also had to cancel our major fundraising event for the year. So that normally we would budget around $85,000 as income from actively fundraising. That will probably be, it'll be about approximately half of that. And the only way we can make up that difference currently is by, using our innate bean counting to cut down on our operating expenses where we can. But that's a big hit. We are not going to be able to reschedule that for this fiscal year, and we hopefully, if everything proceeds as they tell us it will, we'll be able to do that next year. But there is a considerable gap now that we'll be working to make up.
And I just, go ahead.
Okay, one thing about the endowment fund too, it is restricted. So it's not like we can just go and raid the endowment fund. There's a calculation that is
that's part of the request.
Used to determine the amount that we can take from the endowment fund. Now, the endowment fund is invested in the market, okay? And so if the market goes down, we can't take as much as we could the year before. So what has happened is that we, some time ago, we moved some of the money from stock funds into bond funds, okay? With the interest rates being zero that the Fed has determined, that means that our bond fund, we can continue to invest in bonds. You're getting a very low yield, just like you would if you go to the bank and you get a CD. If you get a CD for a year over 50 basis points, you're doing great. So, when we look next year at what we can take from the fund, it's probably going to be less than what we can take this year.
And one of the reasons I wanted to bring that up is because, when we do look at it, it's one of the questions we're asking a lot of departments, the impact of the virus on operations and things of that sort in it. And, if you're not able to have your fundraiser like you normally would, and the endowment's going to be a less of a percentage, so you're going to be a little bit more frugal with how you spend those dollars. This has more than just a one fiscal year impact on the library. And, one of the things I know from being in education is that the library is going to become the swamp for a lot of individuals to go to. So those are the things, you're talking about an increase in usage. Usage means more manpower necessary in those things. And, the part that I want people to understand is that although you have other sources to pull from to fill some of these gaps, that resource isn't as plentiful as it would have been in previous years. So, thank you.
Yeah, I would also, no.
Okay, and that usage is very important. Again, there's a regular group of people that come to the library every day. They come to use the internet. They've got the knitting club. These people have their own seats. If you're there first thing in the morning and the door opens up, these people just run through like a herd of animals, just to get their seat.
Well, let's not say animals.
Okay, but in other words, they use the library every day. Okay, so typically that's your senior citizens, and then later on in the day would be the kids that would come to the library. I don't know if you'd like me to say this, but a lot of times the library is a babysitter for working families in this community. They drop their kids off at the library. If you go, sometimes I go into the library, there's a car that pulls up and there's these kids running into the library with their books. So this is and the reason senior citizens and the young people go to the library quite often is because it is a safe place. There's heat, there's air conditioning in the summertime, and so this is very important. Now, so that's our regular crowd. But with the programming, depending on the amount of programming that you have, you know, the library can bring in another 50,000 people based on the programming. And to be honest with you, anytime I have family come into Norwich, one of the first places I take them is to the library because there's generally something going on. Now, when we go to the library, guess what we do afterwards? We go and we have something to eat and something to drink. And so we're not going to jump in the car and go to Mystic. We just walk down the street and go to the local eating places. And then when my family leaves, they think this is the greatest town in the world. So the image of the library and what it does for the city of Norwich is phenomenal.
Thank you.
I would also add, just as a sort of a footnote to the questions about operations and such, is we have all of the staff, all of the library staff remain employed. There haven't been any reductions in staff. They're all still working from home, providing online content for our public, coming into the library to ensure that any materials that are returned are sanitized and taken care of. So we're trying very hard to maintain a stable working environment for the people who are currently employed, and will continue to do that. Anybody else?
Alderman Gould.
Excuse me. So to follow up on that, so no one's been furloughed. So what kinds of things is the staff doing? Are they physically in the library filling requests for books or?
No, all of our consortium has suspended circulation. What they're doing, we are still getting inquiries from the public, and we monitor our phones and email to ensure that all of those inquiries are filled. People are still actually we're getting a nice bump in library card requests because people don't have access to the physical plant. So they're doing that. All the materials that are being returned to the library from the outlying book drops all have to be reviewed, have to be sanitized before they return to the shelves. Other staff members are working, for example, are implementing virtual programming. So we have staff who are doing the book clubs, staff who are doing the story times, you know, the inveterate sort of hams like me who are doing the poetry readings. So everybody who's on staff is still doing something. We're also requiring that in the time that's available to them that might not be directly devoted to a particular service element, that they are taking online and continuing education courses as part of, this is something that's mandated by the library. You have to do a certain amount of that every year. We've enhanced that, so everyone has to engage in that. They have to provide certification to us that they have, in fact, continued to grow in their positions. So those are all the kinds of things that they're currently doing. I consider them all enhancements. Myself, I'm working on grant applications and also communicating directly with other library directors who are in similar positions in the consortium to find out what we're doing, to find out, what kinds of plans are in the works to reopen to the public so that we're not caught flat-footed and have something on hand that we think is, reasonably well formulated.
I went through my own files and looked on the 16th of December. You did forward a letter outlining a budget submission, but there was no attachment at that time. So, and then I looked beyond that, rolling towards this date. If you could forward that, I'd appreciate it very much, be interested in looking at it.
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to.
Good, okay.
Yeah.
I mean, so The federal programs, loan forgiveness and things of that nature, where does our library sit?
I'm sorry?
Where does the library sit or stand in relation to that loan forgiveness opportunity?
Well, I think we'd be pretty short-sighted if we didn't explore it. And we certainly will. I think any of you who have engaged in that process know what it's like, and I would not say that it's in any way, shape, or form a given that you're going to get that kind of money. But if the question is, have we explored it, and would we participate, and have we filed? Yes.
Good. That's good to hear.
Yep.
Appreciate that.
Yep. No, that's absolutely, I think that's essential.
I'd be interested in the response you get if you'd share that with us.
I would be happy to share it. I hope it's a good response.
I'm more concerned if it's not, because I don't know what types of appeals or other venues are open to those who are not accepted, but don't let that be the final answer, please.
Yeah, it really has been an educational process going through this. I'm used to writing grants to the federal government here and in my previous careers. It is this one, I would say, and again, I don't know how many of you have investigated this. This one is very challenging. It is very challenging. I found it to be a very interesting process, and certainly it has made me reasonably certain that in my next career, I don't want to be a CPA and I don't want to be a bookkeeper. It really quite a fascinating and Byzantine exercise to complete the process. But I'll let you know. I hope it is good news, but who knows?
Hope so, yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
Just two more.
Alderman Gould.
Just to piggyback on what you said about applying for grants, about how much does the library get per year in grants?
We get about somewhere between $10,000 and $20,000. It kind of depends. The thing with grants, especially now, and especially for libraries, grants, there isn't any program that provides underwriting of general operating funding, and that's, of course, where we need it. So when we apply for a grant, say from one that's related to an institution like a bank, it has to be specifically designated for one particular program, and what they're normally looking for is something that's new and innovative. So you can't go back to that well too often unless you're really imaginative and you come up with something new. So the only impediment to getting a grant is it something that we feel is going to be exemplary, and that's generally what they want to know. And is it something that we can do given the current, usually the current restrictions on our staff size? Do we have the resources necessary to implement the program? Usually, more often than not, when you apply for one of those grants, they want to fund the program, but they want you to provide some sort of match, and frequently the match is your labor. Mm-hmm. So you'll be factoring that into what you're going to do to match the amount that they're willing to give you. Yep,
Okay.
It's a good question, though.
And my final question is, do you have a sort of capital account or a reserve account for building maintenance, upkeep?
We have some funding. I won't pretend that it's as much as I would like it to be, and I'm pretty concerned that it's going to have to grow. Mm-hmm. Right now, we do have money that's allocated for an upgrade to the controls on our HVAC system, as an example. That will be implemented, well, whenever we can allow people into the building again. But that's a step that we're taking specifically because we know that it needs to be done, and it's also a cost savings for us. It will help enhance our ability to balance off, you know, what's cooled and what's heated. And, you know, some of the staff think I intentionally keep their spots too cold or too hot, depending on the time of year, but it's not true if you hear from any of them. Anything else I can help?
Anything? Gentlemen, no? Thank you very much.
No, well, thank you. I appreciate your time and attention.
Can I say one thing? Okay, first off, I'd just like to thank all of you for what you do, okay? And I'll say this, and you'll probably be surprised. I grew up in Buffalo, New York, went to school out in Indiana, moved to Detroit, lived in Ann Arbor, lived in Johannesburg for South Africa for a number of years, and I came to Norwich. This is the best town I ever lived in, without any question.
That's what I told you.
So what the mayor means, what he says, this is what I told you. Around the time I first came here, I met him, and for an hour, he cornered me. And he told me I need to live and stay in Norwich, and I'm glad that I did. So thank you.
And you bought our house.
Well, and to piggyback on that, which is a great opening, I have to commend our utility company. For once again, we had power outages last night. They got everybody restored, and we are so fortunate here in the city of Norwich because I know Eversource is still continuing to work on other communities. There's people are still without power, and boy, they get out there as soon as the storm is over, and sometimes during the storm, if conditions permit, to get our lights back on. And what a great job they do, and we're really fortunate to have them here.
And that was a major factor too, because I had talked to Jean from over at the Caras over at MPU, and she cornered me for about an hour too. So I'm very proud to be a Norwich citizen.
Thank you.
And we're very grateful you are.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
6:30.
She's on the
She's
phone.
on the phone now. Okay.
The next budget is the school budget. The budget appears in a summary on page 111, 112, and 113, various aspects of the budget. In addition to that, the superintendent has provided me with a brief PowerPoint that's not on PowerPoint, it's on, you have 14 pages of it. And then later this afternoon, for your reading pleasure at a certain point, I don't know if this is, that we printed it up or we just put it as a file, I don't know. This just came today. So it's supporting data and other items that explain the budget in more detail. That's it, yes.
Yeah, I had Bonnie distribute them out.
Okay, so
we
you
would
have
have
that,
them on the
okay.
desk today.
Okay, so the superintendent is on the line, and I assume, because I heard the buzzer that other people are on the line. Dr. Stringfellow, can you identify yourself, and then can you also introduce the people that are on the line so everybody on the council knows who's attending by teleconference? So I will turn it over to you, Dr. Stringfellow.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your attention this evening. I'm on the line, and on separate lines, you have Athena Nagel, who is our finance manager. You have Jamie Bender, who is our special education director, and then Amber Ritigliano, who's the executive assistant to myself and the Board of Education. I will say that we can hear you better through the computer than through the phone. So if at all possible, if there's a way to speak more into the phone, to the computer, it was harder to without delay. So on behalf of the Board of Education and the Norwich Public Schools staff, students, and families, I'd like to thank you for your sincere partnership with our school department. As the manager stated this evening, I will give a brief presentation. I forwarded yesterday to your attention 93 PowerPoint slides, and I'm just going to briefly go over the first 14. The rest of the slides are really a repeat of what you had seen in the ad hoc committee that you attended with the Board of Education, as well as any of the budget preliminary sessions with the Board of Ed and council members Gould and Wilson. In addition, as the manager stated, Athena Nagel sent over documents today to the council. We apologize. We thought you had them already as they were forwarded to folks in your department, but we did not specifically state they were needed for this evening. So we made that change today. There are also repeat documents that you would have had at the ad hoc session. One is the preliminary budget white paper that you're used to receiving, and the other one I've been referring to as sort of the sherbet-colored pages, and they are a budget summary of really the numbers that are included in our budget. So the first slide that I have for you is the history of the budget. It shows our need to break even with a handful of additional positions would be a transfer to the school department of 9.11% increase. That's not what the Board of Education adopted, however. So we show the Board of Education adopted budget from 2016 on to present. In the past, they've asked for 6.24%, 3%, 9%, 6%. This year, it is a 5.5% increase request, and I'll go into a little bit more detail about the rationale behind that. And then I filled in the city manager's adopted budget, or recommended budget, it's better to say, at 2.4% increase. And in the past, since 2016, the city adopted budget has been it's always been an increase, but it's been a 1.93% or a 1 or a 3 or a 3.27% increase, and this year it's to be determined. The second page is sort of a pictorial, visual look at that previous slide. And then I reviewed the long-term goals that the Board of Education has set forth for me and my staff regarding this budget and eventually your budget vote. And it is to eliminate the deficit spending that I encountered upon my arrival, eliminate our reliance on the city's fund balance, to eliminate our reliance, which predates 2009, on grants for operational expense, and to build our own eventual school department fund balance so that we can deal with our own emergencies, such as boiler replacements, roof replacements, and unplanned expenditures due to state mandates. So those were the goals. And then I was charged with mapping out a plan for how we can accomplish those goals. A long-term plan to get the school department out of deficit spending, to lessen the reliance on grants. And of course, you know that the school department is not able to generate our own revenue. We rely on the city to generate that revenue. And that how you do that is operational revenue comes from increasing the property tax or taking from the fund balance, or a combination. And you've had to use a combination in the past. And so it was our sincere hope to find a solution that's not overly burdensome to the Norwich taxpayer, while also providing basic needs for the children in the school department. The next slide shows you some options that were discussed in detail with the Board of Education and also with representatives from the council, that if you were to really accelerate the lessening our reliance on grants and operating from a deficit perspective, and you wanted to do that within 1 year, that would be a 9.11 increase in the property tax transfer to schools. And then, as you can see, as long as the school department received approximately 2.9% increase every year, which is similar to the cost of living adjustment and our increases from our tuitions and fuel, transportation, et cetera, that we would be able to afford ourselves and start lessening our reliance on grants. If that investment was spread out over 2 years, it could be done as 8 and 4, 7 and 5, or 6.25 and 6.25. The Board of Education chose to have that go over 3 years, spread over 3 years, 5.5%, 5.5%, and 4.5. Of course, that's the planning document. They can't, of course, ever make a request for next year, this year. But that would lessen the burden on the taxpayer, and it's a plan to get us to realize our goals. Then I show it in 4 years, what it would look like, and if we received 4% this year, it would take us 8 years of 4% to sort of get out of that hole. And as a disclaimer, these estimates are based on a pro forma budget. So they don't take into consideration other right now unforeseen projected expenses. And the green font, the 2.9, is the year that we can stop relying on the city's fund balance as long as the planned investments are made. And additionally, just as an FYI, some of these grants will run out in the next 2 years. So really, spending more than 2 or 3 years without a plan for grant funding is a little tricky. And then I thought you might want to know what the dollars were behind the math, and so we gave you the actuals. Those actuals were based on 9.34% increase, and as you know, prior to our Board of Education official vote, we were able to lower that a bit based on experience. And so then I go into sort of a brief explanation on how we would then lessen the reliance on grants, and also to say to you, which you know, the deficit was built over many years. We would not be able to, it wouldn't be fair to assume that we'd be able to resolve it in just 1 year without either expense to the taxpayer or reliance on the fund balance. We've demonstrated through our budget meetings that there is not a plan to be able to drastically cut our staff, that we right now are operating on minimal staffing and in some cases not adequate staffing to meet the needs of our student population and to fully implement our instructional program. We are building a long-term strategic plan, and in some cases, in certain areas, we'll need to intentionally staff in one area and reduce in other areas in order to put forth the very best educational program that we can, and a program that is in alliance with state and federal law. And so, as I stated earlier, a consistent investment over time will afford us the opportunity to not deficit spend and to build our instructional program. So an update as of the March 23rd Board of Education meeting, the Norwich Board of Ed voted unanimously on a 5.5% budget request from the city. And although that's not the total needed to balance the budget, they felt it was the best compromise to help satisfy the current need while also ensuring that we are able to free ourselves from deficit spending. Continuing to rely on the city's fund balance, we agree, is not wise. especially since the Board of Education and the city are moving forward with a building committee to update the school facilities, and we will need to ensure that the fund balance of the city is healthy, which will keep our bond rating solid. That should say solid, not sold. The Board of Education proposed a budget at a 5.5% increase that would realize our goals in 3 years. And I've showed you what that looks like. Then in April, as you know, the city manager proposed a budget that includes a 2.4% increase to the school budget. That is shown in the next 2 slides to be a challenge for us. Is it an adequate increase? Unfortunately, there are other items in our budget that are increasing at much higher rates than 2.4%. We have salaries and benefits, health insurance, pensions, transportation and fuel costs. We also have our high school tuitions that are increasing at just NFA alone between 3 and 65%. Our out-of-district special education rates are increasing higher than 2.5%. And on the second to the last slide, I show you actuals. Certified staff with increase and step contractually is a 5.7% increase. Non-certified salaries, 16.5% increase. Substitute teachers, line item 2.7. Health insurance, 6.3. Life insurance, 4.1. Workman's comp, 27%. Transportation, 4%. Special ed transportation, 12.5. And tuition at approximately 8.7. And these increases are reflected in the budget documents that were sent to you as a reminder today. So 2.4% would not be adequate to address these basic need increases. So we respectfully ask that you consider a 5.5 increase to the schools, and I'm certainly happy to answer any questions or engage in whatever further dialogue you request of me. And I thank you again for your support of our Norwich Public Schools, and especially during this very trying time.
Members, Alderman DeLucia, please state your name so that Jensen.
Dr. Stringfellow, this is Alderman DeLucia. Okay. When you presented the multiple options slide where it was be 9.11% in 1 year, or 6.25% over 2 years on one of the slides, and then the board adopted the 5.5%, and then whatever the percentage is in the 3rd year. When you presented that, you said that if we chose one of those plans, specifically the one that the board ended up adopting, that each of those first 3 years, because of the lower percentages, there would have to be some kick-in, for lack of a better term, from the fund balance to help the BOE budget along until we got to the end of that 3rd year. I'm wondering if that is still true, and if so, what would the supplement from the fund balance have to be in dollars?
So, very good question. So if you look at that slide, it's one of the first slides, it's the first spreadsheet. If you were, as a body, to invest in the 9.11% in the first year, then we would not need to deficit spend, because you would be increasing our budget by 9.1%. And then the following year, as it compounded, we would only need approximately 2.9% continually without deficit spending. But if you, this year, let's say, gave us the 5.5%, then the difference between 5.5 and the 9% would need to come out of the fund balance. you wouldn't be adding to our budget dollar amount. You would be still, I hate to use the word underfunding, but I'm struggling for another word for that at this point. So yes, if you took a look at the green 2.9%, that's where the budget has now been incrementally built strong enough where we can afford ourselves, if you will. I know that you are always our revenue stream, but I hope that's clear. Yes, we would still need to delve into the fund balance until we got to a point where you're funding us at the $85 million level.
So to follow, I guess I don't understand if at 5.5% would require us to supplement from fund balance for a total of 9.11%, right? Essentially, we'd be splitting some of it, right? Part of it would be, 5.5% would be in tax levy, and the remaining percentage, when you subtract that from 9.11, would have to come in cash from fund balance. That's what you're just saying, what you just said. If that's the case, then why in the second year is it still 5.5%? If we're just funding you at 9.11% just from two different sources.
So if you take it's pretty complicated. If you take a look at the next slide and you see the actuals, where the budget is actually moving up incrementally, and you see it's better really to look at the comparison of the last, the four number. If you invested 4% property tax transfer into the schools, then you'd bring us up to a budget of $84 million. If Athena can jump in at any time right now because I'm juggling between two different documents. If in order to make us whole and pay our operational expenses this year, the cost is $85,496,145, then we would need the difference between the $84,000 and the $85,000.
So
that's a pretty good explanation. I mean, another way of looking at it, Joe, is the fact that you as a council have made us whole each of the last few years, even though the property tax transfer, it has not increased the budget. You end up paying for our full budget in two different ways. One is through the property tax transfer to the actual budget, and the other is from your fund balance. And so you'd be continuing to do that unless you brought the actual budget up completely paid for by the tax levy.
President Pro Tem Mark Betancourt is next.
Dr. Stringfellow, how are you?
Hi. Good, thank you. How are you?
Not too good after hearing all this. So I came back. I haven't been on the council in 4 years. Part of the reason I came back, I will tell you, was because I found it very difficult to, now I will not say that I agreed with the council's decision on the amount of funding for the schools. I'll say that up front. But saying that, once that decision's made, I believe there's a rule of law involved. The Board of Education has been abdicating their fiduciary responsibilities as far as this goes. Up to now, the council has, I guess, looked the other way, is the only way I can put it. I disagree with that also. And to be honest with you, I'm kind of perplexed. I almost see no alternative but to, take some kind of action against the Board of Education if this kind of thing continues. This is, the tail wagging the dog, if you will, if nothing else. I think the Board of Education has a responsibility to adjust their spending in accordance with what we've allocated. The fact of the matter that they've allowed this, the council has allowed this to happen for the last couple of years, I don't think abdicates the responsibility of the Board of Education. I'm not sure if I'm saying that quite right, but I hope you get what I'm meaning.
I think
Now,
I
this
do.
is not necessarily you. This is the Board of Education decision. Part of the, when talk a little bit of politics here, because we're political animals up here, let's face it. I'd be lying if it wasn't true. So the problem here, part of the problem is here, we came up here, a lot of us, we ran on a course that we wanted to do some kind of honest budgeting, and that the budgets of the city council were basically dishonest, not necessarily through a fault of the city council so much, but the fact that nobody was saying what the real costs were for education and stuff, and we're spending money out of the unrestricted fund balance for reasons that weren't approved by the council. So I'm having a hard time dealing with this number, this 9.11. And saying, I'd have a hard time with that kind of number anyway, but to say that, okay, we're going to spend this money anyway, regardless of what the city council does, I've got a problem with. So that's something we're probably going to have to talk about, with Corporation Council and decide on a course of action as a council. But I just don't see this as a reasonable piece going forward, because we're going to drop the fund balance under 10% if this continues, and this is no good. This is no good for our bond rating, no good for the future of a potential facilities project, and just no good for the city as a whole. So I can appreciate what is happening with the Board of Ed and wanting to support adequate funding, but there's got to be some kind of compromise. So I'm going to leave it at that.
I'm sorry, I can't tell when you stop speaking, so I certainly don't want to cut you off. So
No, I'm
please tell
done.
me
Go ahead.
So I think one of the things that I examined when I took the job is what are the history of the employee concessions that have happened, and what is the opportunity to reduced costs, realizing that in any school department budget, 85 to 90% of the cost of running a school department is going to be salary and benefits. And the tricky part for the Norwich Public Schools, unlike school departments that I've worked in the past, is that we do not have a rapid decline in enrollment. So you're seeing several school departments right near our borders that are seeing declining enrollment. And you're seeing them show up at our board meetings, especially if they have a high school, and ask for our students to come to their school so that they can take tuitions in to supplement the fact that they're declining in enrollment. When you're declining in enrollment, you can adjust your staffing. And so in the last school department that I was superintendent in, over the course of a decade, we were able to reduce. It was difficult. It wasn't something we liked to do. But in losing about 40 to 100 kids approximately in enrollment per year, we were able to reduce about 90 FTEs in a 10-year period of time. That's just not possible in Norwich because our student population is staying relatively stable. And so if the student population stays relatively stable, you are going to need to have a first grade teacher for approximately every 22 to 25 students. You're going to need to have an 8th grade math teacher for the same amount of students. We wouldn't be able to reduce those. We also have increased dramatically in our students that are English learners and our students with special education needs. And so in one of our PowerPoint presentations, we showed that now 56% of our learners have extra additional learning supports that are required. And those supports typically are coming by way of a human being, an employee, a speech language pathologist, a registered behavioral technician, an English learner, teacher. And so many of you have spent quite a bit of time in our schools, and no visitors have come into our schools and said, we're overstaffed. It's just not accurate. And so I absolutely hear and appreciate what you're saying, and I knew that was going to be the landscape when I took the job, but we've gone over our numbers and our staffing audits compared to children's needs, and there just isn't anywhere that we can reduce. When I look at, okay, so what were the concessions? Teachers had 3 furlough days, pay freezes. Administrative assistants had 2 separate pay freezes. Paraeducators gave furlough days and pay increases. All of these are noted from each of the bargaining unit groups in the white document that was sent to you. They've increased their co-share for insurance. And then the Board of Education, I believe either last year or the year previous, negotiated a less than stellar health care plan for our teachers. That's had a ripple effect in terms of our school department being able to attract high-quality teachers to come to Norwich. Our teachers have largely stayed. We have had teachers that have left, and we're trying to figure out if the pay or the health care is one of the reasons why they left. We're starting to do exit interviews. But what I see when I look at this budget is many years, since 2009, of concessions and pay freezes and increases in their health insurance. And other than being able to systemically lay off, which we wouldn't be able to operate the school department if we did that. I'm not seeing other places of being able to significantly draw down some savings for you.
All right, if I may continue.
Sure.
Yeah?
So in a nutshell, are you saying based on, the situation we're in now is based on the previous years of underfunding?
I hope I heard you correctly, but did you say the situation that we're in now is based on previous year's level funding?
Underfunding.
Underfunding. It's so hard to Monday morning quarterback and say, exactly what was going on each year. But if you take a look at the slide that I put together in the very beginning, what was asked is the first slide, the history of budget. What the board asked for and what the city gave, there's a dramatic difference between those 2 sets of numbers. And so what probably not the best analogy, but what I can say is, as a homeowner, if you are doing the bare minimum and not putting a fresh coat of paint on, not doing your roof, not really investing adequately over a period of 10 years, it's very hard to catch up without a big infusion or investment. And I'm being honest that's one of the issues. Now, looking at it from the city council lens and from the taxpayer lens, the school department's needs have dramatically shifted in the last 10 years. And we're costing more than we costed years ago. And so that's something that certainly needs to be said. But it's not, from my perspective, it's not due to misbudgeting or not investing in the right things. It's due to our needs dramatically changing and the tax base not being able to keep with it.
Where'd you go?
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, Dr. Stringfellow, are you complete with your response?
Yep.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were cut off, actually. So it was rather abrupt. Alderman Wilson.
So I'm going to just ask 2 or 3 questions, and then I'll yield the floor and you can come back to me. Good evening, Dr. Stringfellow. Hope all is going well. One of the questions I wanted to ask is, looking at the Norwich Public Schools budget and comparing it to many of the other departments, several questions kind of, or things pop up, at me, and I can understand this budget was generated, as we've been saying on the last few hearings, pre-coronavirus. So one of the things that I'm noticing or questioned is fuel, of course, fuel costs increase in the budget, and we've seen in most of our department budgets that is decreased, or the allocations proposed are decreasing. And then the other part, I see in many of our departments, fringe benefits and whatnot are decreasing as well. Yet those are areas that are also increasing in the budget. So could you talk to that some, because I think that discrepancy could be a little different, but just I'd like you to elaborate on it.
I'm so sorry.
I can
Okay,
talk to
because
this.
I couldn't really hear you. Thank you, Athena.
So the benefits have a significant increase compared to the other departments because we did not have enough funding granted in the previous years. So right now we have a deficit level in our benefits. So we need to recoup that in the coming year. And that's why we're having an increase in the health insurance. The other thing is the fuel is a similar situation. We added extra buses in 1920, and the fuel cost wasn't budgeted high enough, so we have to budget high enough in the next year, because we weren't sure what those extra 10 buses were going to cost. It ended up being an extra 11 buses.
So my follow-up questions to that would be, knowing the situation that gas prices are in right now, is that something that you could see that cost going down or still increasing?
I can't really answer that. First of all, they're diesel. Actually, that's not true. Most of them are gas now that they're the new buses. But I honestly can't answer that because we're not driving right now anyway. So it depends on when we come back to school, what those rates are going to look like. And I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know what those are going to be.
Okay, I want you to kind of take into consideration, and I think we've been talking about this across the board to many departments as they've come before us, is the fact that we know many things are not going to be the same coming back. So just, considering that. My second question would be, knowing the $85.5 million request that was approved by the Board of Ed, do you guys still plan to hire all of the positions that were in your original budget request? So the 3 reading teachers, the maintainer, the assistant special ed director, the job coach, the transportation coordinator, are all of those things still being considered to be funded in the budget?
So the additional positions were in the budget that we presented to the Board of Education. When the Board of Education did not approve at 9%, then they're going to, then obviously some things are not going to get funded, and they haven't had that discussion yet.
Okay.
So I, as the Chief Operating Officer, believe that an investment in especially the special education director and a transportation coordinator will save us money and will benefit children and programs significantly. We have not had the conversation with the Board of Ed to say if we're only invested at 5.5 or lower or 6%, will those positions still be a priority? They'll be a priority for me. We need them. And certainly I will do my best to try to offset the costs of those positions if they're granted in another area. So if I'm able to reduce somewhere else one position, then I would do my very best to do that. But they have not authorized me to hire those additional FTEs. And at this point, I have no plans to advertise them.
Okay. And then the other question, the last one I'll have, then I'll yield the floor for someone else to ask a few questions, is I know going into the budget preparation for the Board of Ed, we had the discussion. I know you hired the human resource and the payroll individuals. Now, those amounts were factored into this year's full budget? So the salary.
We hired, yes, yes. So
Go ahead.
So we hired someone in pay. We had 2 payroll clerks, and they were working perpetual overtime in the department. And they had, I believe, 5 payroll clerks within the last few years had quit because the work was so significant. When the last, we have 2 clerks, they're in the secretarial union, and when one clerk quit, I replaced them with a payroll director, someone who would be permanent and someone who could bring a level of education and expertise and experience in payroll to our department and to eliminate the overtime. I had, quite frankly, not heard of overtime in public schools other than if there were a snowstorm and you were paying the custodians overtime. This was perpetual overtime because the work was so significant for these folks who worked very, very, very hard. The human resources director was a, not requirement, was in consultation with the auditors. And it also became budget neutral because we eliminated the adult ed payroll account receivable position. It was recommended by the auditor that we bring someone in who has experience in school department human resources. And she has been on board about a month and has found savings already by having that expert lens to the position. She has created a FTE position list that didn't occur before so that we can keep track not only by people, but by actual position numbers. She's identified some errors that were made in insurance in the past. That were not made on purpose. They were made because we had one clerk managing all of the different human resources attribute of almost 900 employees. We also temporarily hired a registration clerk. I think I've described to death the state of our registration office, and we needed to get it online and bring it into the 20th century. And so we temporarily brought on board someone who had a lot of expertise and brought us to online registration, which made it easier for families. Errors weren't being made, aren't being made now. We're not physically transporting boxes of papers from school to school. That position has already been eliminated. It was a very short-term position. And then we brought on an attendance officer because, quite frankly, we weren't in the past in disagreement with families about who are residents of the Norwich community and by law have the ability to attend our Norwich public schools and who we should be paying high school tuition for. And he's been on board for a few months and has already paid for himself in high school tuition, staffing, and service needs for students pre-K through 8. So we give a monthly update to the Board of Education on the progress of the attendance officer. He's also helped to make sure that children are attending school. And so I think you'll find that largely they're budget neutral decisions that are just a more effective and efficient way of operating the department. But yes, they're already included in the budget.
So the last comment to that is, I just want to, for council members, it was in my document that I, passed out is a few meetings ago, is the overall, with just those positions into this year's budget, we're talking about $850,000. That's the position salaries and also the benefits. So, and that's also including the maintenance truck. So, that is a large sum of money that makes a huge difference in the overall cost and figure of the budget. So, those are things to think about. As she kind of has put forward, they're not positions that are filled right at this moment. But, I think part of it is we're asking all other departments to be creative with what they have. And, we're going into a time of uncertainty as a budget, not just education, but every department of where things are going to land in the next few months. So I think, for me, it's, I know that, education is important, and properly and adequate funding is an important thing. But I think the other part too is we're going to have to be creative and make some hard decisions in the coming months.
Thank you. Alderwoman Gould?
Thank you.
Alderwoman Gould is next.
Good evening, Dr. Stringfield. Thank you for being on the phone with us tonight. On one of these slides, the long-term plan options, in green, there's a little asterisk that says, indicates the year we plan to begin lessening our reliance on grants.
Yes.
Okay, so in the grant list that you talk about eliminating, it's about $9 million. Where are you making up for eliminating $9 million worth of grants in your budget?
So I want to make sure that I heard you correctly, so if it's okay, I'm going to paraphrase it back to you. You're looking at the slide that says long-term plan options to eliminate deficit spending and reliance on grants. And
Yes.
you're looking at green font indicates the year we can plan to begin lessening our reliance on grants.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
Okay, so as you know, yes, we've had dozens of conversations about the grant funding that we have, and some of our grant funding are going to be our entitlement grants, our federal entitlement grants, like IDEA and Title I and Title II, 3, and 4. Those we believe will continue. They may be at differing levels, but not significantly. The state entitlement grants, however, are not entitlements. Our Alliance grant, our Priority grant, our Magnet grants, our School Improvement grants, School Readiness, Smart Start, Teen Outreach, and 21st Century Community Learning. Since 2009, the school department has had to rely on those grants to fund positions and, quite frankly, to keep operational. And that's not, it's not proper, and it's not something that we can rely on in the future because they're going to go away. And so they're meant to give poor communities an extra something. And we've been using them as our basic something. And so it's a goal to wean ourselves off of using these grants for our basic operational expense. We can't begin to do that, in my opinion, until we are off of deficit spending and have a budget that we can live within. And so the green font is meant to show you that's when we can start working on our grant reduction plan. we can't do them at the same time. Did that answer your question?
No, to be perfectly honest with you, I'm sorry to say that, but you're saying if you got 9.1% for 2021,
Correct.
and then in 2022, you need 2.9%, and you're going to start on this plan, where do you, or maybe it's not in this document, where you plan on reducing that $9 or $10 million that we get in those grants? Where are you planning on starting to reduce them? And if you don't lose those grants and they continue, what is your plan to do with that money?
So there, you are correct. You do not have in front of you a plan to do that, because we can't start to do that until we fix the deficit first. So the plan to do that would be and it depends on how many years I have. If we're looking at the 8 years, hopefully we'll have brand new buildings by then, and we'll be operating within a new infrastructure. But if it were in 1 year, which it certainly isn't going to be in 1 year, then year 2, what you should expect from me is a plan for lessening our reliance on grants. Right now, that's so beyond that we can't work on that this year, no matter what. It's beyond our grasp to be able to do that. We can't. We're still relying on your city fund balance. So our budget needs to be increased higher, and then we can start lessening our reliance on grants. So, and quite frankly, the decision might get taken away from us. So if the SIG grant goes away, which is destined to at veteran school, right now that's paying for the one reading teacher in the district that we have, that we got by using SIG grants. So it may be, the unfortunate answer may be a reduction in those very necessary basic student needs that we have been providing through the grants. Our Smart Start grant provides preschool education for our students. Our 21st Century Learning and extended school hours in summer school provide summer school and extended school day, things that our children need. And so we may get to a point, if there's not another revenue stream that is accessible to us and these grants run out, that we just won't be able to provide those services for children. I'm going to do everything within my power to not have that happen, but that's the truth of it.
Okay, my next question. I see what is included in the PPE, the per pupil cost, and you put out this very lovely chart that shows us that where we rank at 114th out of 165 other school districts. So I'm trying to figure out what formula you used, or what numbers, if you're using the $81 million divided by the 3,494 students. Are you?
So I just want to make sure we're in the same place. Are you looking at the, let me just, hold on for a second. I'm trying to get to you. Are you looking in the 93 slides, the slides that we went over at the, our budget committee meetings, the Connecticut per pupil fiscal year 2018 ranked highest to lowest?
Okay, this says Connecticut PPE fiscal year 2018 ranked highest to lowest.
Yeah, so I didn't come up with those. Those were given off of the Connecticut Department of Education website.
So how do you know what formula it is that they use to determine it? Is it 3,494 students divided by the $81 million?
So they take our operational budget and they divide by the total number of students that was reported to them that year.
They include everything. They include, so it's the in-district students, the high school students that we're responsible for, the magnet students, the special ed students that are outplaced. So it's like the 6,083, for example, not the 3,500.
So it's all of our students plus Norwich Free Academy?
And
Well, yes,
outplacements.
because we pay their tuition, so it's the students from NFA and the total cost we pay NFA.
Okay, and,
What
well,
what it excludes is it does not include anything food service related, anything adult education related.
well,
and
why
I
would it
think
include
that's
adult
about it.
education if we're talking about?
So if you look, Alderman Gould, at the very end slide after number 165 Danbury, it did report integrated day charter. I didn't list charter schools in our grant, but I mean in our PowerPoint, but I thought it was important to list the integrated day. NFA does not report. I'm presuming, it's not that NFA doesn't report, I misspoke. The state doesn't report NFA in this list. That was a question that came up, I believe, from Alderman Wilson. Where's NFA? We went back and looked throughout. They're not included in this document. So I believe that those students are not counted twice, if that makes sense.
Okay, so let me move on to part A of the question, or part B, excuse me. What is the correlation here? Why is,
What is the correlation? Why is what, please?
the correlation between how much we spend versus how much Canterbury spends, or how much Franklin spends, or how much West Hartford spends per student? What point are you trying to make to us?
I'm not trying to make a point to you. The question was asked what the per pupil expenditure was of the Norwich Public Schools and how we related to other districts. So I merely shared the information with you.
So that was a question that I had asked during the budget cycle, kind of how when we do the, like, for example, when we went back and did like the police study and whatnot, to get a better understanding of finding towns that with similar demographics as us as far as operating budgets, but also populations of students, and seeing what they are spending compared to us, because then it's also looking at the trending part of what are their budget increase values over the last so many odd years. So that's the reason I asked for the per pupil cost, because it kind of will give us that overall number of their operating budgets.
Okay, okay. On the additional thoughts slide.
Yes, I'm with you.
Okay, at the bottom, it says, allows us to build a plan to lessen our reliance on grants, because once they are gone, the district will need to absorb the staffing and those programs into the operating budget. Why?
Because the money, we won't have revenue coming in from the grants any longer. So there are some grants that will remain. They're called entitlement grants. But the competitive grants all have an end date. That end date was communicated to you all on the documents. They're the blue and white documents that were given out at the ad hoc committee meeting and at the budget committee meeting. So when the magnet school money goes away, then that revenue source goes away. And the only other revenue sources that we can rely on, in addition, and we'll keep writing competitive grants. It's not that we don't have an appetite to do that. It's just that they're drying up in not in our favor. And so in order to continue the staffing and programs that the grants currently support, we'll have to plan to absorb them in our local operating budget.
All right, so then,
So,
I'm sorry.
so can I give you an example, if that's not,
Sure.
if that's not helpful? We receive $91,000 for extended school hours, so we pay for after-school programs. If we didn't have that money, then, and we wanted to keep the after-school programs, that would have to be something that we either wrote another grant for and were accepted, or we would have to pay for it out of our operating budget. Many districts pay for summer school, preschool, and after-school programs within their operating budget. Ours, we wrote competitive grants for. The money that we'll continue to get is IDEA preschool, IDEA special ed, Title I, which is in support of our students who are on free and reduced lunch. It's a federal poverty entitlement grant. Title II, Title III, which we will continue to get based on the number of L students that we have, and Title IV. But as you can see, they're not a lot of money. They're, certainly our Title III, $111,000, of which $85,000 comes to the public school and $25,000 goes to private schools for all of our ESL students. That doesn't pay for the salary of one teacher's salary and benefits. And we certainly have more than one ESL teacher. And so some of these federal entitlements don't even begin to take care of our costs in those areas. But we don't anticipate they'll be going away.
Do some of these grants require the Board of Education that once the grant is gone, continue the program and the staffing?
Magnet will.
I'm sorry?
Magnet grants will.
But the other grants do not have a caveat that we'll give you the money for 3 years and you have to continue the program for 3 years? Or something similar?
I would have to get back to you, and I'd have to inquire specifically on each grant unless Athena or Jamie know off the top of their head.
I don't know of any off the top of my head, except for IDEA, which is an entitlement grant, does also require that there be a maintenance of effort that's maintained on the Board of Ed side, and so far we've kept that balance appropriately.
So I guess my question is, if we don't get a grant any longer, why is it necessary that we have to absorb the staff and those programs if there isn't a caveat?
So I'll give you a different example. So I've already said that if we don't get the summer school grant anymore, that will be a consideration, and we don't have any other revenue to rely on. That would be a consideration for the Board of Education to make. Do we continue to offer children summer school? Same with extended school hours. If the extended school hours grant dries up, then we have to, as a Board of Education, decide, do you want to continue with that program by trying to absorb it in some way into our operational budget, or eliminate that service for children? But if you look at the Alliance money that comes in, that's $6 million, $5.6 million that comes in. There are lots of staff that come under the Alliance funding. We would, when I look, let me quickly move to, so in what do we pay for right now with state Alliance funds? We pay for Spanish teachers. We pay for ESL teachers, instructional specialists. We pay for one of the supervisors of special ed. We pay for 3 administrative specialists, the librarians, the instrumental music teachers, the art teachers, the psychologists, school counselors, and I could go on, the nursing supervisor, director of information technology, and several necessary programs for students, Lego League, Imagine Learning, Raz Kids. And so we couldn't do without ESL teachers by law. We couldn't do without school counselors and psychologists by law. And so we would have to come up with a way, either write another grant or eliminate something in another area in order to continue to have these staff members.
But if we're trying to eliminate our reliance on grants, why would we write another grant?
Just a little louder?
If we were trying to eliminate our reliance on grants, why would we, again, be going out for another one?
So I guess I could turn that question around and say, if the Board of Education and the City Council were in agreement that they would absorb these costs into the local operating budget in full, we wouldn't need to.
Okay. Under the long-term goals of this budget vote, you talk about building a school department fund balance so that you can deal with your own emergencies. What other school districts have a school department fund balance?
There are many school districts that have, it's not called the fund balance, but basically it's called unrestricted funds, where if you have excess money at the end of the year, you're allowed to put, I think it's up to 1% aside into a special fund that is specific for Board of Ed situations. So
emergencies.
Right, and I've requested that over and over again. I don't know if it ever made it to the City Council, but I have requested that fund be set up for the Board of Ed on many occasions, and it's been denied. Now, more and more towns and cities have it across the state. So I'm not sure why we still have been unable to get it, except for I obviously haven't asked for it the last 3 years because we've had no extra funds.
So maybe I can clarify. So based upon my experience in the last 2 school departments that I worked in, we were able to build our own fund balance for those emergencies. So right now we're dealing with a boiler emergency at Stanton School. We don't have a fund balance to be able to pay for that emergency. It certainly wasn't budgeted for, nor were any of the capital requirements. We don't have a capital budget. So I walked into a school department that doesn't have a capital budget plan. Typically, school departments have a capital budget plan, and it says in 3 years, you're replacing this budget. In 6 years, you're replacing, I'm sorry, not a budget, a boiler, a roof, technology. We don't have something like that. I'm building one, and we'll have one by May, but we don't have a revenue stream to support those things. And so this slide is meant to show sort of the steps. Step 1 would be, and we're 4 steps away from even thinking about creating a reserve so that we don't have to go back to the city if there's an emergency. Right now, our choice is the boiler goes down at Stanton. We don't have any reserve fund in the school department to be able to deal with that type of an emergency. And so we have to go to the city, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you'll have 2 choices. You can either do an incremental tax increase, which I don't think anyone would want to do, or you'd have to take from your fund balance of the city. I would prefer that we are not in a position where we're relying on the city's fund balance. So as a goal, and Rome wasn't built in a day, so it's not going to be quick, but this is the long-term goal, to get to the point where we can afford ourselves. And affording ourselves, in my definition, means that unplanned expenditures can be paid for either fully or in part by the school department. I mean, if the city council is not in favor of a fund balance, then that's certainly your prerogative. But typically, really healthy cities and financially healthy school departments establish a small fund balance so they can deal with their own roof, boiler, or other emergencies themselves so as not to deficit spend. I was once in a position where 10 very impacted special education students moved in unexpectedly, each requiring their own special education bus with a wheelchair lift. That was a $1 million expense that we had not planned for, but we were able to offset that expense with our fund balance instead of going back to the city. So it's a goal because that would be my goal. But it certainly, if the city council is not in agreement, then we would like to hear that.
Oh, I was just asking the question. I didn't know if any other schools, districts had, a school account such as this. And my last question, and probably the biggest question, is we work very hard on giving you money in a budget. And the teachers are working hard and the students are working hard. What dollar amount does it take to close the achievement gap between what we're spending on our students and the results that we're getting on our Smarter Balanced tests?
So, I'm sorry, I want to make sure you were finished with that thought. You're asking what dollar amount will it take to close the achievement gap?
I mean, we're giving you $80 million, you're getting another $15 million in grants. How do we close the achievement gap?
So in order to close the achievement gap, you have to make certain that children that are operating at a disadvantage become advantaged. And the way that you do that is you invest in them. And so we had a discussion during the budget subcommittee meetings that I had never heard of a school department that didn't have remedial reading teachers. So we did quite many years ago, but over the years of cutting and cutting and cutting, those positions had been eliminated. We don't have enough ESL teachers in the district. We don't have some specialized programs for some of our students who are living in poverty, who have special needs, who are learning English. We need to continue and build those investments in those programs in order to close that achievement gap. So an achievement gap is typically taking your typically achieving students and your students in special programs, and if the range of achievement between them is 10 to 15 percentage points, closing it would be to get within 5 percentage points or break even with their achievement. And so we have significant achievement gaps. And for some of our students, it would be what I've outlined in my plan that Alderman Wilson referred to, those extra positions. So reading teachers. I built a reading teacher in at Veterans Elementary School this year, remedial reading teacher, through their SIG grants. My idea is to plan 3 reading teachers this year, and then 3 reading teachers next year, and then 3 reading teachers year 3, which will also be the time that the SIG grant dries up, so that we're making sure that every single school has a teacher that can work with students who are reading below grade level. That's one example of an investment. So is there an exact dollar amount? I don't think any school department could tell you an exact dollar amount. You put a plan together to meet the needs of the children in various ways. Some will require no money. Some will require money in staffing. Some will require money in specialized programs. And we've spent, I can't speak to prior to this year, but I know that there was a lot of time and investment and energy before I came building a state-of-the-art mathematics curriculum and a state-of-the-art reading curriculum. We've just started using those in the past 2 years.
All set? Okay. Alderman Wilson again.
Again, Dr. Stringfellow, so first I'll start with a small one, is looking at your plan, with the 5.5s over the course of years, how did you come up with the 2.9% value? I look at that value, and then I look at some of the surrounding towns and some of the comparables, and some of them are 1% and 2%. So why 2.9% over every single year?
So I'm not sure if all of the surrounding towns that you looked at have tuitions at their high school that are incrementally moving up between 3 to 65% increases, depending upon the program that the students are in. But the largest factors for us are our high school tuitions, our collective bargaining agreements, and our transportation, both special education and within Norwich transportation. So it's a culmination of those factors that we believe if there is a long-term investment that's less than 2.9 or 3%, will slide back into needing to deficit spend.
So actually, and you actually slide right into my next question, the elephant in the room that hasn't been addressed yet is the impact of NFA's budget on your overall budget. So, of course, they have about a 3% increase, and then there's those that are larger. I know we had the conversation, and I know the numbers had went down during the budget preparation process. Where do things stand as far as the overall impact of NFA's tuition on your budget? Have you guys had any more discussions about the impact of those high increase programs? Have you guys come up with any other alternatives to help with those costs? Because I think that is also a huge driver. And if we're not having those conversations, it doesn't help in the long run.
So are you saying the conversations with NFA?
Yes. So where are conversations at as far as where things stand? I know they have the 3% increase for regular ed, and then there are some other increases that are much larger for special ed, for some of the special ed programs. Where are things at as far as those conversations? And I know it's going to be complicated because with us being out of school, those PPTs and important meetings that would needed to be held, I just trying to figure out where those are as far as those numbers.
So NFA approved their tuition and then told us what it was. They didn't bring us in and have a conversation and ask us, we didn't have a budget hearing, if you will. They held a meeting and they approved it, and this is what they told us the tuition was. So those tuition rates, as far as I know, are not changing. They're increasing at a minimal of 3.01% and at a maximum of a 65% increase, depending upon which program they decide our children will go into. Now, we do have a seat at that table, as does the parent, but it's not a Norwich Public Schools decision. It's largely an NFA decision. So I guess the short answer is they told us the approved tuition. To my understanding, we don't have a say or a conversation that can happen regarding that. In terms of their general education program, all of our children that are going into their general education program, we will be charged 3.05% more than we were charged previously, both at the NFA Broadway location campus and at the Station campus. Then when it comes to special education services, that's decided at the PPT team. Jamie, I'm not sure if NFA's had any PPT meetings since the COVID closure.
No, we haven't had any PPT meetings since we've had the closure. And in terms of, making the initial decision as to which high school program that students would be going to, that is done at the middle school table and in collaboration with the parents as, as parents and students with disabilities have this similar options as students that don't have disabilities. So it's not like the person at the table administrating over the meeting can dictate that they go to a different program because it's cheaper. Can't do that.
So the follow-up question to that would be is, I'm guessing for your middle school students, that would be happening during their 8th grade year, making that decision. With the options, is there a conversation earlier than that? You know, because I'm thinking, you know, with some of the programs, and I know that you've done some things within the district program-wise to help with special ed in certain areas such as Strive and different things. Have there been ways of trying new things with students of that population prior to the process beginning of deciding where they best fit?
I'm trying to hear what you said. So are you asking if we're talking about the decisions prior to the 8th grade transition PPT?
Correct. So are you doing creative things to try new methods with the given student to possibly broaden the options that they may have going into specific programs at NFA or wherever they choose to go to high school? Are there other things you are doing to be creative to allow the parent a variety of options?
They have parent meetings every year that talk about the student choices. Case managers who are very intimately involved with the parents of the students that we're referring to go talk about the different options. I've been at several meetings myself where we talk about different options that are available for parents. So as far as other creative ways, you know, I certainly take some suggestions if you have them.
Okay, my next question deals with the overall, I know we had the conversation about custodial services, for example, and the breakdown of what that budget looks like. Have you guys made any progress as far as long-term thinking when it comes to that service?
Long-term thinking when it comes to what service, please?
Custodial.
Facilities?
Yes.
I'm so sorry. Could someone repeat the question?
Yes, he said custodial.
Oh, custodial. I'm so sorry. You asked the question, and it's reflected in the budget slides, what the overall custodial and maintenance cost was to the district. We right now have an opening that we've not filled for a maintenance director, and we immediately had contacted the city manager to see if that was an area where both departments could share services. I don't want to speak for the manager. Maybe he could chime in and talk about
He's gone on 1 second.
The discussion did occur, and in reality, the time period where where the school department had to get their budget in, and the time element that would take to consolidate, it wasn't. There was such a short opening on that it wasn't feasible for now. And I know that Dr. Stringfeld had to fill that position, so there wasn't a lot of time to really develop a consolidation plan on it.
Okay. And then, you know, I think my biggest other question deals with the deficit of this year. You know, knowing the impact of the coronavirus on the overall spending of the school budget with, of course, students not being in schools, but learning, distant learning, and different things still taking place. My bigger question is knowing where things are now, with technology changes and different ways of learning. Are there any added costs that you could see coming into this budget year from just the way that things are going right now?
So the Connecticut Superintendents Association developed, and I participated in the development, as did Athena, sort of some distance learning costs and savings projections. We're far away from knowing the actual impact financially of this closure, largely because we are getting the governor's executive orders like on a daily basis, and then having them interpreted by our lawyers to see what the impact is, and largely because it's not over yet. And so we know some of the costs that we did not budget for that we are incurring now have to do with a loss of computers. So we did not envision loaning out hundreds, maybe even eventually thousands of computers to our students and teachers and other staff, which was a requirement that we do. And we already know that some of those computers will be damaged inadvertently, and some of those computers will be lost to us. We have a very transient population. We've had students already move out of district who have one of our computers with them, and we're having to go get the computer in a time where we're not supposed to have face-to-face interaction. That's been challenging. We have had to add some software programs, which we hope will qualify for reimbursement either through the CARES Act or FEMA or one of the programs that the governor or the federal government will come our way. But we're not sure about that yet. We have families, I think we're down to about 36 families who don't have Wi-Fi access at all. And so Leanne Gomes and the Department of Youth and Family Services have helped us significantly, but we presume we'll get to the point where by Friday we'll have to invest in some hotspots and put them in locations throughout the city, either on a school bus or in some of our schools, to give parents some Wi-Fi reach. We've had to print materials, mail materials that we've never mailed homes before. Some special education augmented device, some complementary services if this for students with unique needs, if this closure continues much longer. We fully bear the cost of unemployment expense. And our legal bills, I'm certain, will be significant because I don't think there's anyone I've talked to more than our attorney trying to interpret what each and every executive order means for our employees and for every facet of our day-to-day lives. We are still paying at full cost. Our admins, our teachers, our paras, food service, nurses, custodians, maintainers, secretarial staff, central office staff. We put originally on furlough interventionists, substitute teachers, after school workers, and as you know, we're still investigating whether the newest order from the governor is going to require us to bring them back. We know that we'll be losing some Medicaid reimbursement, which we count on as revenue. We know we'll be losing building use fees because no one's using our buildings and paying us rental fees. And we know we'll be losing preschool tuition. We may lose grant funds, some of the grant funds, if we can't honor the spirit of which the grants were written. We're trying very hard to not let that happen, but it's still sort of an unknown. So for anyone in the universe, and I'm certain it's not anyone in office or on staff, but perhaps folks listening in, we won't be saving money. That we're pretty sure of. But we're hoping, doing everything we can to minimize distance learning costs. And transportation is still an unknown that our lawyers are sorting out on our behalf.
Alderman Wilson, you all set?
Yeah.
Okay. Alderman DeLucia.
Dr. Stringfellow, this is Alderman DeLucia again. I'm going to express a little bit of frustration, and then I'm just going to make some general statements about the budget proposal ahead of us, that's in front of us. First, I'm frustrated to hear, that the window was too small to look at the facilities folks and public works being combined, and so apparently that says to me, all right, well, so we're just going to go out and we're going to hire somebody because we absolutely positively have to. Frankly, you hired an HR director, you hired a payroll supervisor, or whatever the title is. All right, when both of those activities happen right here in City Hall every single day, now we're hearing that the window is too small for us to take a look at facilities. Now, I know that a lot of times individually we make suggestions, and we've been suggesting that for the last 2+ years, and it hasn't moved forward. So my rant on that is, if I need to write a resolution directing you guys to make that happen and get a majority of my colleagues on the council to go along with it, then that's what I will do. But these things need to happen. We're going to stop just filling positions without looking at what's going on and trying to find those efficiencies, because it's the core of the reason why we are where we are here with the budget. Now, to speak specifically about the board's adopted budget, I know that the ad hoc committee was only able to meet one time, and that I submitted 10 questions, and you answered them very well. I shared them. When I got those responses, I just shared them again tonight with my colleagues on the council, so that it's fresh in their emails as well. And in there are a lot of the explanations as to my little expression of frustration that I just gave you. But looking at the budget right here, I'm sorry that we were not able to have more ad hoc committee meetings. And I say that because when I looked at the long-term plan options to eliminate deficit spending, and I'm going to forget about the reliance on grants part, okay, to get us out of deficit spending. When I looked at this when it was first presented, I saw, okay, year one, if we're willing to cough up 9.34% at the time, the night that I saw it, in 1 year, then from that point forward, we're not deficit spending anymore, and 2.9%, barring anything catastrophic, would carry us through for the next 10 years. The Board of Ed, within its authority, decided to choose the 3-year plan. Now, when I looked at this 3-year plan, what it said to me was, we can't afford the 9.11% in 1 year, but if we spread it out as 5.5 in year 1, 5.5 in year 2, and 4.5 in year 3, then after that we could get to that 2.9% per year, all right, and end the deficit spending piece. So essentially taking that 3.11% and spreading it out over 3 years. Yes, more expensive, but when you spread something out over 3 years, that's what happens. It's going to be more expensive. Here's the thing. What that 3-year plan said to me was, you can live, that the board can live with the 5.5% this year, could live with the 5.5% next year, could live with 4.5% the following year, and then get us on this 2.9% curve, okay? To me, that said 5.5% and not a penny more in this fiscal year. I mean, you get what I'm saying? You know, that's the way I interpreted this. Tonight, I'm hearing that interpretation through my fault, whoever's fault, maybe the fact that we didn't have enough ad hoc committee meetings to really drill down on this. But we're finding out that that's not in fact true, right? So that I have a real problem with this, because to go all the way back to what Pro Tem Betancourt said earlier, we need to get to a point where you say, this is how much money, well, I should say the board says to the council, this is how much money the superintendent needs. And if we give you that money, the expectation is that you're not going to come rolling back in here in June, a year from now, and ask us for another $1 million more. Unless something catastrophic happened, and if it did, we have emergency bonding authority that we could cover whatever the catastrophe was. But, and that's what this spreadsheet really should have said to us. Plan A is to give us 9.11 on the front end, and we're all good. Plan B is to spread it out over 3 years, but whatever, if you give us what we ask for in those 3 years, we won't come back asking for anything more. And we're hearing tonight that, in fact, that's not true, that we will be hearing again, and we will be kicking in money at the end of the fiscal year, every year for those 3 years. I'm sorry, I don't have an appetite for that.
I'm not certain how you were communicated to previously, but what you said, what I said in the beginning is what I said at the Board of Education preliminary committee budget meetings and at the night of their vote, is that if they invested 9.11% in it, then you go to green, which means we wouldn't be relying, we could live within our budget after that. Because then on top of that 9% increase, every year we get to a point where we would only require 2.9. Again, this is a huge projection on a pro forma, and it doesn't take into consideration some of the things, quite frankly, that we face this year, which is to hear that our high school tuitions, which make a great deal of our budget, are increasing more than that. It doesn't take into consideration that. It's based on the expenses that we have now going forward with the salary increments that we know to be true today. But if you, and I agree that 9.11% is a significant number, and I believe that's what the Board of Education wrestled with, particularly in these difficult times with the COVID closure and how that's impacting the local taxpayer and the local tax base. They certainly wanted to spread it out over not 8 years, not 10 years, but 3 years. But they didn't say, I don't know how to explain it. In spreading it out, the good news is a lower percentage for the taxpayer. The bad news is that we would still need to wean ourselves off of the use of the city fund balance. The only way to do that within 1 year would be at a significant impact to the taxpayer. And so I don't know how that got confused, and if I had any part of that, I certainly apologize. That was not the intent. It was to show you that if you invested in the 9.11%, then our goals are realized except for our reliance on the grant, which would be Part B. If not, it will take us years to get to the point where we can live within our budget. And believe me, that's my goal too. I've never not lived within a budget. I inherited this. And so I'm with you. I want the same thing that you want. And we're doing everything that we can to lessen our costs and turning over every rock since the day I was hired, working with staff to say, do we need to replace that? Can we live without that? Those are the things that you don't see every day. And maybe we don't do a good enough job of highlighting those for you, but they're happening. That's one of the reasons that we brought in an attendance officer, is that there's work to be done in making our work more efficient. And once we get fully efficient, there will be cost savings in that. We've realized some this year. But no, unless we can incrementally raise revenue to increase our budget to what we're currently spending, we would still have to rely on the city fund balance, regrettably.
Just one more. So, and this is rhetorical, and I'm not trying to bait you, certainly. And again, let me be perfectly clear. I do believe that this entire budget and all of the information was put together with fidelity. So, we talk about, honest budgeting and dishonest budgeting and this one. So put those charged words aside and just say, yes, this entire process is being done with fidelity. The math doesn't lie. If we gave you what the board approved, which was 5.5 this year, at $85.5 million, okay, that's still $3.2 million less than the 9.11 that you say that you actually need to fix this all in 1 year, right? Even if you were to come in somewhere under that, that's the same thing that's been going on here for the last 4 years. Why would we change what we've already been doing, which we said is broken? That, if we're going to be in the same situation, it's just the numbers are different. At some point, we need to be able to say, all right, the board asked for 5.5, aside from, with all due respect to the city manager, aside what the city manager put in front of us in his proposal, the Board of Education asked for $85.5 million. Okay? If this council gave you that money, you need to stay within that budget, period. I'll yield the floor. Thank you.
May I?
No. Go ahead.
Yes, good evening. This is Mayor Nystrom. Superintendent Stringfellow, I want you to know that, one, I'm very glad you're here, and I want you to continue to be our superintendent. And I know this is a tough evening. You inherited quite a department that needed a lot of help and a lot of effort. But I'm glad you're the person that's there to do it. Having said that, I have several quick questions, and they really are quick. First is, how many paras are still in our school system?
How many what, please?
Para-educators.
Para-educators. Athena, do you have that in front of you?
No, but Jamie knows. I have 167.
Okay, and how many certified teachers?
I think it's 178. But I'd have to pull up a spreadsheet.
I'm looking for it.
Okay.
How many of the certified staff are non-tenured?
How many are non-tenured? Hold on for a second. I have a spreadsheet on that. Give me 2 minutes. I'm almost to it. Kristen, I can find the non-tenured information if you need it. All right, I'm just entering that folder right now. Hi, Amber. Forgot you were there. We have, I have them broken out by school. So we have about 10 at Uncas, about 10 at Huntington. We have, let's see. We have roughly, I'm going to say 90.
90
those are
are
not all, those are 90 people, not 90 FTEs.
90 of them are non-tenured?
Correct.
Or another way to talk about it, recent hires within the last several years?
Correct. Within
Okay.
the last 3 years.
Thank you.
So we have,
We have about 326 certified teachers.
what did I say? I thought it was 378. Say it again, Athena.
About 326 certified teachers.
And about approximately 90 people. Some are part-time. So it's not 90 FTEs
Okay,
are non-tenured.
Could you repeat that? How many certified teachers? I'm sorry.
326.
326.
Starting in 18 and then follow up 19, and now this will be the 2021 year. Did the Board of
Sorry,
Education,
Mayor, can you say that again?
to your knowledge, Madam Superintendent, has the board provided notice to non-tenured positions that there may be some budgetary impact? It's an old past practice of prior boards of education in Norwich that I do not believe was followed in 18, 19, 19, 20. Has that notice
So
gone out?
There are two different notifications. One is to provide notice for performance, and one is to provide notice for budgetary need.
Correct.
And they're both of those timelines were just extended by the governor. So there used to be a timeline that would be by May 1st, and that's now been extended due to COVID-19.
So the notice has
I
not,
presume you're talking about, so for example, if we had 100 less students and we needed 4 less teachers, we would provide a layoff list to the 4 least senior non-tenured teachers. Is that what you mean?
unfortunately, yes. And it's not a subject that I don't think anyone takes lightly. But it's an option that boards of education have annually in dealing with budgetary issues.
Correct.
And I'm concerned that what happens if the notice doesn't go out? For example, in 1819 and 1920, I don't believe any notice was provided to non-tenured positions. And as a result, in keeping with the position the board adopted that there would be no further reductions, there were no further reductions, but the option of having that was actually removed.
So I'm familiar with the reductions in force process and procedures. And as I said earlier on the call, in my prior districts where we had a reduction in students, that was an unfortunate decision that I had to make. That there are 100 less students expected, therefore we're going to lay off an elementary teacher, a middle school teacher, and 0.2 of, let's say, art, music, library, etc., until we got 4 FTEs that could be reduced due to a decline in enrollment. We don't have a decline in enrollment. In fact, we have the opposite of a decline in enrollment. We have an increase, we have a stable enrollment and an increase in need. And so I can't speak for what happened in the past, but I presume it's similar to what's happening this year. If I laid off, I'll give you, for example, at one of the schools that I'm looking at right now, it's 2 first-grade teachers, a 4th-grade teacher, an ESL, grade 2, grade 3, and 2 special educators. So at one of our schools, those are the non-tenured teachers. And if I laid them off, who would teach those 1st through 4th grade students?
I understand the argument. In the past, those issues were brought forth by the Board of Education and your predecessor, and the board grappled with them. On some occasions, they made those decisions to provide those layoff notices. In others, they did not. The issue is, though, leaving options on the table, I guess, after that long discussion. A lot has been said tonight about the ability to fund our school system. And the reserve fund balance appears to be looked upon by the Board of Education as a second funding source automatically. And I have to tell you, it is not. That is not its purpose. And so I hope if members of the board who may be listening to this hear that message. The reserve fund balance is not there to be tapped in to allowing a Board of Education to intentionally overspend their allocated budget. You've heard that from Alderman Betancourt, the concern. You've heard the concern from Alderman DeLucia. And I want to emphasize that the reserve fund balance is not for that purpose. And it does pave the way for higher interest rates. And I said this at one of the meetings at the Board of Education leading up to tonight, that we're going to need the general public's support going forward with a consolidation program for our schools, which will ultimately allow us to spend less money on capital and, I hope, more funds on educating kids in the classroom. You have to ask yourself, will we have the support of the public if this practice continues? What I'm hearing tonight is the third year in a row, regardless of what the council allocates, you're going to spend it anyway and just hit the reserve fund balance. So I would caution you, because the reserve fund balance cannot go below 10%. That's in the ordinance. It would take a change in the ordinance to lower that. So you might need to calculate what that difference is, because at most, that's what's available. At best, I don't know that the will of this council is there to provide it. Anyone else? Members, Alderwoman Gould.
I just have one other question. Where in this budget, your ask was $85 million. Where is the other $15 million in grants that you get? Where do you allocate that money? Because it's not on this piece of paper.
Correct,
And
that's in
you're
our
a-
revenue
So
side.
you're asking.
And you received a copy of that. It was in my hands 3 seconds ago, but now it's not. So it's revenue. It's a separate document than the operations
I understand
budget.
that, but it costs $100 million to run our school system presently.
No,
Can you say that again, please? I'm so sorry.
85.
So where is the $15 million?
The 815 is revenue. The 85 is spending.
Correct.
Yes. But
15, the 15 million in grants is covered in the 85. It's part and parcel. It might not be saying, okay, it might not be line item out that way.
No.
No?
No.
That's not correct.
no, I
No.
believe it's
No.
$85 million
No, it's
from the
addition.
taxpayers and $15 million
Oh, really?
in
Yeah.
grants.
Yeah.
So
Correct.
it is $100 million to
I'm
run
sorry, my
the. bo-
apologies.
the- It's $100 million to run 1 year of education in the city of Norwich.
Well,
Is-
you'd have to take out the $1.1 million that goes to private school, and you'd have to take out our high school tuition
I'm
in order for that to be
rounding.
accurate.
I'm rounding the numbers, but it's $100 million. Or
Correct.
yes. So
6,000 kids.
So we've got what you're going to do with the 83, the 82, the 81, the $80 million. We have a list of what you're going to do with that money, what line items that hits. You're going to put $30,000 in the severance pay line item, and you're going to put $900,000 in the FICA employer share. What are you doing with the other $15 million?
So you already received that, and that was the blue and white sheet. We can send you another copy, but it was, there was one page that's the summary that gave you that 15 million broken up by each grant. And then you had about 5 pages that followed it that told you exactly what we spent this year by grant. Understand that those grants for next year aren't written until May or June, and the money doesn't come into us until sometime between July and October. So we can at best tell you what was spent this year. So, and that's what I read to you just a short while ago, but there's 5 pages worth of information. So if you look at our IDEA preschool money, for an example, we get $35,920, and what do we purchase with that? we purchased .37 of a preschool developmental specialist teacher, and we purchased preschool supplies. If you look at another grant, the information that we gave you already is in Title I. We received $2.3 million, 46,000 of that we're the shepherd of the grant funds for private schools. But when you look at Title I, what's spent, an administrative specialist, a board certified behavior analyst, 2.5 FTEs, technology teacher, an English language arts teacher, special education teacher, writing of curriculum, 2 preschool teachers, special education coordinator, 0.2 social workers. All of that information was given to you already, but we certainly absolutely can make that available to you again.
No,
it's not a part of what you vote on, and therefore it's not within the operational budget, but you're certainly entitled to have both sides of that equation, the revenue side and the expenditure side.
Just a small comment.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Alderman Wilson.
So I think what Alderwoman Gould is getting at is the fact that when you look at it, you know, even though the grant says you're spending supplies, you have a specific position, even though it's not the overall ask from the council, why is it still that an additional 15 million is needed, or you have an additional 15 million in grants on top of the 85 million that's asked, when some of those positions, of course, are grant funded? But why is it the understanding of why is it 100 million rather than the 85? I think that's what we're trying to get at. So along the line,
they're accounted for in a complete balance sheet. So you're not paying for, if there are 10 special educators, 2 may be paid for with IDEA and 2 may be paid for with Title I, and then the other 6 are paid for with taxpayer money. They're not double counted anywhere.
So then my follow-up question would be is, looking at the pay schedule that you have, or the increase schedule with the 9.3 or 9.11%, even once we get to the 2.9%, you're still counting on the additional 15 or between, let's say, 10 and 15 million dollars in grants still.
Correct. And that's why I made a notation in green font to say to you that, as a reminder, we would like to, grant funds are supposed to be used to give kids more. So to give a really good example, Title I money. Title I money comes into Norwich, much more Title I money than would come into Preston or Montville, because it's the federal government's way of partially closing the equity gap for students who are poor. And so they give you money in order to give poor students an advantage. And we get, based upon our free and reduced lunch census, $2.3 million that's supposed to be spent on extra reading teachers, extra math teachers, specialized programs. That's the purpose of getting those grant funds. The regular education needs theoretically should be paid for by the local property tax. It's not my best solution for how education is funded, but that's how education is funded in the state of Connecticut. And so what happened prior to my coming, and I'm not faulting anyone for doing that, it's just the situation that happened, is we got to the point where we weren't getting enough in the property tax revenue in order to meet the basic needs of the children in the school department in terms of state and federal law. And so they would have had no other choice but to start allowing some of the grants to supplant that funding.
Oh, okay, so then essentially what you're saying is, as the years go on, we're talking between, we're getting to that $110, $120 million dollar mark much quicker between the combination of grants and the amount to the city. We're talking it costing a lot more over time than just the amounts on the actual chart.
You've been relying on grants since before 2009, relying on them for operational expenses. That's what I've read in your budget documents for the last 11 years. And so like I said, this is a huge hill. Like the first step, I think we're all in agreement, is that we've got to lessen or eliminate our reliance on the city fund balance. I completely agree. And then we've got to lessen our reliance on the grants. And that's going to come from a combination of three things: more investment in the operational revenue, me finding every single possible way I can to cut costs, and the building project that both bodies have committed to. When those three things come to fruition, then we will all have achieved every goal that was stated tonight, which I don't think anybody is in disagreement with. We don't want to rely on the fund balance. You're right to say that it's not a good thing. We don't want to rely on grants, but we can't operate without first grade teachers and special educators and principals. So something else has to happen in terms of planning for revenue in order for us to not do that. Because what we can't do is lay off 100 employees. Then the school department wouldn't be able to run. It's not a dramatic statement, it's just an accurate statement. And so, yes, there are many hills to climb. Hill one is getting ourselves into exactly what Alderman DeLucia was stating, to the point where we live within our budget. We don't take a single dollar out of the city fund balance unless something urgent and unpredictable happens. But that our normal day-to-day operations don't use that at all. That's what I want. That's what we're all working towards. And just to clarify, because I didn't really get a chance to before, I didn't say that the window is too small. I don't think that the manager and I are saying that we don't want to collaborate on going forward shared services, but that's got to be planned very thoughtfully with different bargaining units of different groups that do different things.
So actually, that actually gets me into the next point that I was going to make is, Mr. Salamone, is there any way, as we are starting this process, that you could do a little investigating as to the capability of, if HR was to take on doing some of the roles of the school department, hiring, what would that capability look like? And also the payroll situation, and I know Josh probably could help with that, but I think us having a better understanding of the capabilities of those two functions within the city sides of the departments will help. We can't tell, of course, that the Board of Ed who to hire and what to do, but I think those are two things that we can investigate as an earlier shared service to figure out. I think part of it is we've got to be creative, just as the Board of Ed is, and there's going to be some hard decisions that are going to have to be made. But I think relying on the fund balance, it's no way possible we can continue to do it at the rate that we're doing it. Or we're just not putting ourselves in a good place even going forward. We really don't know what things are going to look like once this pandemic ends. So, we don't want to handcuff ourselves to certain things. But I would love for some investigating and reporting back to us on those two things.
Can you get a shot there?
Sorry, go ahead.
This is Pro Tem Betancourt again. If we could get back to the macro view and, get it down to what we're talking about really which is this fiscal year. So what I've kind of been hearing so far is this 5.5% that the Board of Ed has requested is not the real number. Am I wrong?
I'm sorry, can you say it again?
The
You want to know the exact dollar amount?
Yeah, the 5.5% increase that the Board of Ed approved is their request is not the real number.
It will not fulfill the entire budget. It would have to be offset by something else.
Okay.
Correct. Am I
All
saying
right.
that correctly?
Question, yeah, all right. By something else,
Yes,
okay.
that's correct.
The second part of the second question is do you have any idea if the Board of Ed intends that offset to be spending on the part of the Board of Education, or do they intend to use the UDF again?
I'm so
UFD,
sorry. Could
yeah,
someone
yeah,
else
go
repeat
for
that? Do
UFD.
I have any indication
He's
as to
asking
whether
if the Board of, he's asking if the Board of Ed intends to basically cut down to 5.5%, or if they're saying 5.5% intending to still use the fund balance for whatever's left.
That's exactly.
Right,
I
that's the
certainly
question.
would not want to speak for the Board of Ed. I would say that if I'm understanding their perspective fully, they need 9.11. They understand that that cannot be generated easily in property taxes, so they are asking for 5.5 and spreading it out over 3 years, as was relayed before. But I don't. They have no budget reduction plan that would be a complementary piece up until the 9.11%. So that's a discussion that they would have to have.
Okay, I guess the question is for the Board of Ed then, in a sense, I imagine, and is it, the real ask is at 5.5 or is it 9.11? And it's not an ask in my view if this is what you're talking about. You're telling us what it's going to be. And I think in this case, if that is what it is, then the board is abdicating their fiduciary responsibility as far as, what they're supposed to be doing. So, I mean, I believe you've been underfunded over the years, by and large. But that kind of, what we're getting for an ask right now is not reasonable. So that's my point. Thank you.
Superintendent Stringfield, this is the mayor one more time, if I may. One other question I had, and I didn't get to it, and you touched on it lightly. The governor issued an executive order ordering school boards to pay their transportation costs, even though kids are not being transported. And I know that in earlier discussions that was looked upon you as a possible means of helping to balance costs. You've been consulting with your attorney about that executive order. Can you share any information with the council that would shed any new light on that subject?
So what I don't want to do is violate any bargaining or negotiation rules that are happening between two solicitors. But what I can say is we utilize the force majeure concept in our contract with transportation, which pretty much says if some act of God happens and you can't run buses, then we don't pay for the running of buses. That's in simplified version. And so Athena has been using a couple of buses to help us with our feeding of the children, breakfast and lunch throughout the city. But other than that, the buses haven't been running up until the time that the last executive order came out. And so so am I correct, Athena, as today we're still in force majeure, no buses are running besides the handful, correct?
Correct. Yep, that's correct.
Right. And so we are, Pete Marr and other attorneys that work for the Board of Ed are working with Athena and the bus company in order to sort through the executive order language. And as soon as they've come to some sort of an understanding that's different than the force majeure, if they will come to a different understanding, we will let you know. But that's where it stands today. And understand that different school districts throughout the state have different contract language. And so some of my other colleagues weren't able to do what we did because their language was written differently. And so there are many school departments in Connecticut that were paying the entirety of their bus contract, even though buses weren't running. So we're doing our best to lawfully save that money where we possibly can. If we're ordered to put it back, then that's something we're sorting out. We don't know that yet.
Thank you. And also, the buses fill up at our fuel depot. I don't know what else to call it. And so that fuel is not being picked up or purchased and utilized, so there would be some savings there as well if our contract's allowed to be enforced as written.
Correct.
Thank you. If you feel that the city can help in that investigation, I offer that to you now.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Mayor.
Is there any other questions? Well, I want to thank you on behalf of everyone here on the City Council, our City Manager and our Comptroller, and John's Executive Assistant, Jackie Barbarossa, as well. We appreciate all the information, and I appreciate how deep you've dove into this whole budget process with the city and the Board of Education. The amount of information you're sharing is very, very, I'm very grateful for it. It does help.
Thank you. Thank you for your time this evening. Thank you for your consideration and permitting myself and my staff for calling in. I know that was not the most comfortable route to take. It made translation a little bit more difficult. I would have certainly preferred to look you all in the eye and have this very important discussion with you. But I appreciate your flexibility, and I know you have a lot on your plate to balance, and I certainly respect the position that you're in as well.
Thank you. We respect yours as well. Thank you. Have a great night.
You as well. Bye-bye.
The honest budgeting you asked for in the beginning, it's them. It's not us.